Hi, my name is Benjamin Nuget, CEO and head of the Delta Engine. We have recently released our Milestone 2 beta, and now very simple 2D games can be created. If you want to check it out, just click on the download button on our website to look at the source code in detail. We are working hard to extend the functionality and will allow deploying to many devices soon. And then we will add more advanced features like 3D functionality and more powerful starter kits. In this tutorial I will talk about how to get started by installing the free Visual Studio Express 2012 for Windows Desktop and using Nuget to grab the Delta Engine and NUnit for testing. We will create a simple application which just displays a simple sprite on the screen. Then we will extend the application by doing some interesting experiments. In the next tutorial I will talk about creating the breakout sample game. Let's get started. Type in Visual Studio Express into your search engine and just click the first link. There you can select Express for Windows Desktop and click the download button and then click the install now button. Then you can quickly download it, it's just a megabyte, and start the installation, which will itself download like 700 megabytes to install everything. Now go through the installation process. Now that you have installed Visual Studio Express, you can just start it. For the first time it will ask you about the registration. You can just click cancel and do this later. So let's just create a new project and select Visual C#, and you can just create any project. Let's choose a console application. Let's call it tutorial 1. And I put my stuff in C code, but you can put it wherever you want. And the new application should be created quickly, and then a good idea is to clean up a bit, so I actually don't need any arguments and I don't need all this stuff, don't even need system. And in the references I certainly don't need all this stuff except for system. So let's check it if it works. Just press F5 or click the start button and it works all fine. Next up I'm going to go to properties and switch to .NET Framework 4 because I actually don't need 4.5, and I actually don't want a console application, so let's just select the Windows application. And in the build settings you can also select 32 bits. This will just get rid of some compiler warnings, but it actually doesn't really matter. Pressing F5 still works. Next we want to start actually coding some Delta Engine code. So we actually need to get the Delta Engine somehow, and the easiest way to do this is to right click on References and click Manage Nuget Packages. So for this you either need Visual Studio 2010, Service Pack 1, or any version of 2012, which all have Nuget included. Then click on the Online tab and type in Delta Engine. And there you can see 3 different versions of the Delta Engine, so you can select OpenGL, DirectX or XNA. They all actually work the same way, so let's just choose the first one. And this will actually install all the dependencies automatically. So if you click close, you can now see that it automatically added the dependency Delta Engine needs, for example the Auto Factory, and then also all the parts of the Delta Engine you might need, like graphics, input for touch, mouse, keyboard, and so on, or multimedia for sound playback, and then some other useful assemblies for rendering and managing windows and stuff like that. So the first thing we can do is just create a new application and then start doing something. And in most unit tests it's useful to write down the class you need, and then it will inject it, be injected here automatically. So in our case we want to render something on screen, so we call the renderer and then use a lambda to do something with it. In this case we just add a simple colored rectangle to it, and we need actually to pass in a rectangle. So before we can do that, we should add the needed references. So you can just click on the little blue box under the code and make sure that we have everything working. So now it looks much better. And now we can actually see with the help of the IntelliSense what the colored rectangle actually wants from us. So we need to pass in a rectangle and a color. And for the rectangle, we can just create a new rectangle. And again, we need to add the missing using directives. And let's just make the rectangle go from 0 0.5, 0 0.2, 0 0.2 to 0 0.6, 0 0.6. And this will create a rectangle somewhere in the screen which goes from 0 to 1. And for the color, let's just choose yellow and make sure that we close all the brackets. And that's basically it. Let's start the application by pressing F5. So that's all you need to create a simple yellow rectangle on screen. Okay, so actually this kind of coding is more what we do for unit testing. So let's actually create a class. We can put it anywhere, so usually it should go to a separate file, but for this simple tutorial it doesn't matter. So let's just create a new class, call it box, and just have it derived from the colored rectangle. So we actually don't need all the code up here. And in the constructor we just call the base constructor, and then we can just copy everything we did up here and put it in the base constructor. Actually we don't need to do anything else. And now we can even simplify the code up here by just using a generic and then pass in the box to be created automatically. And then the application will actually do the same thing as before, but now we actually have a class and can do some other useful things with it. Pressing F5 still works. Great. So what's next? We should maybe do something more useful, like actually drawing some image or something that looks more like a game. In order to do that, right now you would have to create a content folder and then drag in any content you want. So I have a small image prepared here, which is a Delta Engine logo, and I just dragged it in here, and it needs to be copied to the output directory. So you need to select copy to output directory, and you can either select copy always or copy if newer, and then test if it all works by just pressing F5 again. Still good. And now we need to change the code to actually load the image that we just put in here. And in order to do that, instead of deriving from colored rectangle, we just derive from a sprite. And the sprite actually needs different parameters, so it needs an image and a rectangle instead of a color, but you can also pass in a color. And to load an image, we need a content object. So let's just pass in the content here, and then we can use this content object, which again needs a reference, so make sure that you add the using. And now you can use a content object which has a generic load method where we can just request an image and type in the name that we have here. And then we can use the same parameters we had before. And now we passed in an image, which we also actually need to add. And now we should be able to see, instead of the colored rectangle in our box, we should see a Delta Engine logo. So let's just press F5, and that's it. That's how easy you can do it. And now we should maybe refactor a bit. Because it's not really a box, it's now a circle. So let's just call this class logo. And this will actually change both the using up here and the class and the constructor. So let's just do it. Test it again by pressing F5. Still works. Finally, let's do something more interesting with our logo class. So we actually want to put it somewhere different on the screen, except in the center. And since we want to have maybe more than one object on the screen later, we want to make it a bit smaller and also put it maybe at a random location. In order to do that, we can just use the door area, which is the same thing we passed in here, and just assign a different value to it. So let's just use a helper method which is called rectangle from center, and then let's just put it in the middle of the screen but give it a different size. So let's give it a new size, and let's use a random function and make it somewhere between 0.1 and 0.2. And this randomizer here we could just pass in or create ourselves. In this case it's a bit easier to just pass it in, so we don't need to worry about the implementation details. And let's close all the brackets, and if we press F5 again, we should now see a box logo in the middle of the screen, and if we press again it will be a bit different, a bit smaller this time. And this gives us actually the possibility to create many different logos by just typing in some number here, and if we press F10 again, now we have several logos on top of each other. But that's actually not that interesting. So we should do something more useful, like moving the box around or maybe putting it at a different location. So let's just add a velocity to this logo and also give it a random direction. So let's just give it some value between minus 0.2 to plus 0.2, and the same for the y value. So it gets also minus 0.2 to plus 0.2. And now we need to create this velocity, which is just a point. And let's check if it still works. Yes, but we actually didn't do anything with the velocity. In order to do something, we should override the render method, which automatically gets a renderer and a time, but we don't actually need it. The only thing we want to do is to change the position of this object. There we can just use the draw area center, which is a bit easier, and just add the velocity to it, and then also apply the time that actually happened in this frame to this formula. If we press F5, now we should be able to see all the sprites moving apart, but they all disappear from the screen. That's not good. So we want to make them go back into the screen once they reach the borders of the screen. And there's a little helper function we can use. You can also use some if-else statements if you want. But there's a helper function, reflect if hitting a border, where we can just pass in the object that we want to reflect. In this case it's our sprite itself. And then the borders would be our screen borders. And the renderer actually has a property called screen, which allows us to get to the viewport, which describes like where the borders actually are. And if we now call this method here, we can just reflect the velocity when we hit a border. And if you want to look at it, you can just take a look at the source code, and it's just 4 simple if statements. If we now press F4, we can now see the boxes bounce around and reflect at the borders of the screen, which is pretty cool. Next, we want to start actually coding some Delta Engine code. So we actually need to get the Delta Engine somehow, and the easiest way to do this is to right-click on References and click Manage Nuget Packages. So for this, you either need Visual Studio 2010, Service Pack 1, or any version of 2012, and now we got which all have Nuget included. Then click on the Online tab and type in Delta Engine. And there you can see 3 different versions of the Delta Engine. So you can select OpenGL, DirectX, or XNA. They all actually work the same way. So let's just choose the first one. And this will actually install all the dependencies automatically. So if you click Close, you can now see that it automatically added the dependency Delta Engine needs, for example the auto factory, and then also all the parts of the Delta Engine you might need, like graphics, input for touch, mouse, keyboard, and so on, or multimedia for sound playback, and then some other useful assemblies for rendering and managing windows and stuff like that.